coming on. We appreciate it. I know everybody's busy, and you're going to talk about some tackling, which is near and dear to my heart as a defensive guy. I mean, if you can't tackle, we're all going to be in a world of hurt on defense. So, thanks for coming on, Coach. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, I appreciate you having me on, and all the positions I've held, whether it be assistant coach, coordinator, position coach, head coach, whatever it is, anywhere in between. This is probably the most near and dear thing to my heart. One of the things I'm going to share, I'm just going to share the screen. I'm good here, Coach, with the screen share, right?
Yeah, you're good.
Good. All right. I just always want to check that first because I could start talking in terms of something and nobody's on me when looking at what we're doing. But
no, you're good.
So one of the things that in my role right now, I'm able to look very closely at tackling. I assist with the linebacking, a lot of quality control stuff. But as I said, I've been in a lot of different positions with it too. And going back probably about the better part about 15 years, you're 100% right, Coach. We weren't very good at certain points of time at places that I've been. And we figured out like really quickly that if we can't tackle anybody, if we can't finish a play, we could preach whatever we want to do. But in the end of the day, we're going to need to go ahead and get ball carriers down. Over the time, though, you start to look and see, like, what else can I do to kind of improve on that? And especially when it comes back to, like, within it, you start looking at, goals, and you start looking at yardage, and you start looking at reducing yardage and body position and all the other stuff. Now, at some point in time with that, too, there's a lot of tackling systems and a lot of programs that came out and got infused into this thing, too, which really started to segment some of the teaching in it. But in some respects, it almost becomes like overload too. So kind of like, where do you go from there? So I'm going to start with where we are right now, because I always talk about this thing. It's like, you can kind of see me talk about this like year by year, month by month, and now with the time of reflection of being off, you get an opportunity to kind of reflect upon like where you got to and why you get there. But like where we are now is, by defining ourselves, before we even talk about tackle, we want to define ourselves as a defense. And one of the things when we talk about defining ourselves as a defense is we talk about that we play gap and a half defense, we own our leverage, and we burst to the football. So what we're talking about with that, we're talking about a statement that talks about from the time anything in between us and the football, okay, leads to us being able to leverage it, and we're going to attack it right there. So these terms are all going to like be touched upon as we talk about it in our teaching points. But when we look at it, we're talking about, this is our statement that we're making. Everything that we're teaching works to this statement. We take our shot, because again, one of the biggest concerns I think I had as a coordinator at one point in time was I used to, like, back in the day when we all kind of, I used to punish for like missed tackles and yards after contact. We used to do running, we used to do all sorts of up downs and whatever the case may be. And then the next game after I would do that, I would end up with less yards after contact, but more yards given up. And I came to find out that by emphasizing the whole idea of missing tackles and looking at it as almost like a negative, I was preventing my players from taking more chances, from taking risk, and they were more prone to say, I don't want to get punished on Monday, so I'm not going to take a chance on Saturday. So we built into it that we want to be able to take our shot, right? We define the strike zone, and then this is the big part of it. We want to make sure to dent and disrupt, and everything we talk about is about denting on block destruction, denting ball carriers. We want to reshape. We want to get to a point. We want to make sure that when we get there, we're throwing somebody off their path. And this is a huge one too. And this is where we've gotten to. Everybody kind of talks about yards after contact. The way we define that for our players is we always want to finish on top of ball carriers, and we want to be facing the opponent's goal line. If we could do that, we're in a much better position to reduce yards after carry. We classify everything we do. When we talk about tackling, we talk about knockback tackling. So with that, like, people kind of ask, I don't subscribe to any one system. There's a lot of systems out there that talk about a lot of different things. But the reality is we kind of have developed our own system, and the emphasis on it is about knocking it back. And it's about what can I do to get solutions, and what can I do to go ahead and benefit from the product of it as well. So one of the big things is about the messaging. And I like to touch on this when we start off with tackling, because everything that we have has to be in alignment with each other. So the message for the team, from the head coach to the coordinator to the position coach, has to be the same, is what we find. Because What I've kind of found being in all these different facets of it, right? If I was the coordinator, I got to support what the head coach is saying. And I have to have the coaches, that the position coaches support what I'm saying. Because at the end of the day, the head coach is going to stand up in front of the team, right? He's going to be able to say something. You know, you end up with the coordinator is going to stand up in front of the side of the ball. And I've got to be able to preach that too. So the messaging we talk about has to be in alignment too. And great messaging really starts with great teaching. You know, I touch on the fundamental part first. And the reason I kind of do this is because, you know, a lot of tackling systems out there are about drills. We want to talk about this in respect to being able to look at this in relationship to fit, right? Football comes down to this. I heard a really good coach once say this, right? You know, football, defensive football is about fitting the run and distributing on the pass, right? When it comes down to it. So in order for us to be able to be in position to track footballs and close space and do all that great stuff and knock people back, we got to be in great position. So everything that we do, we talked about, and I've been the older coach that's worked with younger coaches and the younger coach that's worked with older coaches. And it comes down to being able to teach. So always looking at this term CASKER when we're talking about how we're teaching everything, and from call, alignment, stance, key, eligibles, and read. And here's how something like that would look. Here's an example of it, right? So an example of something, how this would look, if we're talking about it, is based on like level, right? Side note, coach, for anybody here, I do have this PowerPoint and I have some links to like video that I have. So if you email me, if you just message me on Twitter with your email, I'll be able to send it. It's all preloaded. I can get it out relatively quickly. So this way, I kind of say that now, just because this way you could sit back and absorb it. And I have a lot of information. So this way, if I go through it too fast and you have to call back on it, it's not an issue. So I will be able to send that out if you just go ahead and message me. Follow me, I'll follow you back, and then we'll message it and send it out to you. Not a problem. But one of the things we're looking at, right, when we're looking at each of these things, call, alignment, stance, key, and eligibles, is like everybody's got something slightly different in each of their boxes, right? And I kind of have a generic term here. This is not necessarily for our group, but you really on the first level have an interior player, and an edge player. And when you're looking at it, you look at everybody's got something slightly different. If coaches can't answer this question, it's going to be harder for players to answer this question for each of these kind of things. And the other thing I always talk about is the balance, right? The first level players, the guys closest to the football, should have much less in their box than the players on the third level, right? But you start to look at this, if you're able to put a spreadsheet of everything that you put into play and see how it fits in here, you start to find that you can make a rule, right? And again, it's all going to be about rules and then the breaking of your rules. And the reason why rules are so important when it comes to obviously tackling is you got to be able to identify when you're out of phase in a lot of your rules, right? And that's one of the points of emphasis too, because grading tackling is great, but live grading a tackling is even better, and recognizing when you are out leveraged by design, out leveraged by scheme, or out leveraged by skill. So you have to determine that pretty much right away. So what we try to do is you try to take some of these complex situations and make them simple everyday kind of things. And right now, currently, I've taken advantage of what we do in during this time off. And one of the things, we had Mike Singletary on one of our meetings, which we were fortunate to do. And he had a great line. He said, "You watch film until you find something." He told our players that, right? He said, you can't teach somebody how to watch film. You watch film until you find something. So there's a little hashtag, and I can send you the link for all this stuff, something called TACKLESTUDY that we've been doing. With the NFL Game Pass, been looking every game of the season and kind of finding one unique thing that's happening within tackling. And a lot of it has to do with the scheme, and it has to do with what it looks like in the finished position too. The reason I'm going to go through some of this first is because just to kind of look at what I'm looking at when I'm looking at tackling, like from a generic standpoint, and then ultimately kind of define it as we go on. So one of the things that we looked at, right, with this tackle study is it got kind of like interested. In the first quarter, I saw these really, really strong tackles, like a lot of tackles that were in line. Players were in really good body position. Players were fit up. Players were right on it. And then during the course of a game, I would say like, wait a second, like there's more and more leverage loss. There's more and more leverage loss. And then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, everybody was like in situational football where everybody was aligned like in the right spot and there was really good leverage. So did like a 3-year study on it in the NFL. And you look and see that this is really what it comes down to. It comes down to consistently that yards per play in the first quarter, this is for all the teams, good and bad, grows as the quarters go on and then reduces in the fourth quarter. And you look at it and you say, like, that's kind of when you get figured out a little bit. That's kind of when they move apart. That's kind of when they figure out how you're going to line up for that game. And it does take, of those maybe 6 series you have in the first half, it takes like 3 series to kind of figure that out. And then the adjustments in the half, then we both get to make adjustments. So good, bad teams, it has nothing to do with record, it has nothing to do with championships. You can break it down by team and you start to see that the really good ones do accelerate off there on offense, but you ultimately see that there's a growth from quarter to quarter, right? And it kind of, as we were looking at it, I said, well, wait a second. I said, we're watching the Last Dance, and I was reading the book The Last Season, where Phil Jackson's talking about when in 2003 when he was with the Lakers, and he had this great quote in there that I pulled out, and he said, "For all Michael's acrobatic exploits and leadership, we prevailed because in bold here we shut down opponents for long stretches, especially in the fourth quarter." So when it comes down to defensive football, one of the other things to pinpoint how tackling can help is when you're out of phase, you're like, avoid long stretches, right? Of shutting opponents down for long stretches. When they get you for a series, they don't get you in the next series. But as much as we see, like, sometimes we have that blind faith where we get off the field and maybe they don't score, maybe they turn it over on downs, but they move the ball a little bit. We find ourselves out of phase because really only 3 ways to get off the field, like takeaway, right? Maybe they make a mistake, in there too. That there's turnover on downs or there's a score, which we don't want to have happen. But the avoiding of long stretches and the ability to get back in the fourth quarter was key. And, he talked a little bit about, Pippen was really the quarterback of the defense. And one of the ways, and you look at this through this study, when you start to see how you might be out of phase is a little bit how your posture changes on the way to the ball. And there's a lot of natural ability goes back to like strike zones when it goes back to the, from the chest, from the waist to the chest, from the knee to the hip, and from the feet to the knee. There's a lot of like athletic ability. There's a lot of situations that get into that. There's a lot of teaching that goes, and we teach all aspects of it. But when you start seeing bigger guys have to make tackles like you're looking like all the way on the right, you could probably venture to guess that you don't have the best leverage on the play. Probably not going to be the case. And when you start to see more and more plays that are made in the open field, you could probably venture to guess that too. So these are easily identifiable things as you see to say, like, my goal when I drew this up was to get in a situation where most of the stuff that I'm doing is on the tackler on the left. And I really want to stay out of situations where it is a tackler on the right, right? Although you have to teach for all those. The right really is like the prolonged stretches, and the left is really about like the control situations, if that makes any sense. And when you look on the bottom across there, and I'll expand on it too, it's really going to be about where your feet are in relationship to your posture, right? If I am at about a 90-degree posture, I'm going to probably get my feet as close as possible to that ball carrier, right? I'm going to be able to stay square. I'm going to be able to dip and strike on the rise, as opposed to when I have to have some length to me, I'm going to take off of a single leg. And as opposed to when I have to get full extension of my body, I've got a power plant off of there. So when we talk about the near foot, near shoulder, or the same foot, same shoulder, depending on how you do it, you got to kind of look at it from a different perspective. It's not always going to be in the same place. Sometimes you're leading with your pads. It's still that same foot, but it's not only about the first foot in the ground, but it's about your ability to get that first foot in the ground, drive off it, and get the second foot in the ground. No difference from when you're teaching stance or anything else out of that too. So here's a couple examples, right? Just in looking. And again, I have a full file of these, and I can send them out to about 25 minutes of these, and you're more than welcome to it. It's on Twitter, on my Twitter page, but if you want the YouTube link to it, I just put them together. This has just become like a quarantine hobby at this point. So you look at some of these scenarios. I'll put some scenarios that we're looking at there, how they can get broken down, how situations change. Here's one, safety in a box. And we talk about CASKER and why it's an alignment. Linebackers kicked over with a bunch with the safety in the box, okay? We got play action. We're working away, 4 deep, 3 deep, 4 under, and turn back into the play and be able to explode right through it. Now, he's got open field. He's got to change space, and he knows, again, the runner's probably going to spin off of him, and he's probably not going to just come to balance, and he's going to burst through there, right? Again, they see the play action, turn back into the side, don't cover just air, the leverage and keeping it back on the inside shoulder, inside and in front, and burst through while keeping the cleats into the ground. Just an example of something we'd be able to look at as we break it down. Okay, here's another one too. Another safety in box, classic one too, right? We talk about a lot of, especially red zone stuff, safety in a box, bare front, motion goes all the way across the formation. Okay. Now we start looking, motion comes back in, so you get a snugger condensed set off of this. Okay. Now look, you have to have communication, right? You have to go ahead and sort this thing out because there's probably going to be some kind of switch on there too. And then ultimately what you're going to end up with is, the safety's got to fit because he's a down safety versus a bare front too. But you start to see some of this communication that happens when they get on top of each other, right? And that's why we get into the defensive fundamentals in CASKER first, about making sure in these situations, like right away, keys, reads, where's my eyes, okay? He's got to engage for him to fit off of there. Once that trade, that they have to sort that in and out on the go, okay? Now that goes back to be able to work and get, but again, the core of it is going to be back to get square. The core of it goes back to get square and be able to work through, stay attached, drive your feet, get through the block, okay? Another one too, okay, just another scenario, working off of D-line movement. Here's another one, working off of D-line movement. So if I'm working off a D-line movement right here, okay, and I'm going to have the top part of my screen, we're going to go one gap over for those two down linemen on the top end of the screen. So that means the edge is going to be changed a little bit when they start to run wide on that. So that, again, you start to look at, like, my path has to change, and I've got to be able to drive off that inside foot. It's a good picture of it, okay? As he sees the back's shoulders open, he's got to stay on top. You see how square he stays and how big he stays, and his ability to go ahead and drive off the near foot coming back. One of the great parts about this view, right, as he sees the back's going to declare, and as he declares, he drives off the foot, and he gets about 6 additional steps in the ground, and he drives his feet and stays attached through contact. And again, that's true knock him back because again, maybe he's not facing the goal line, but he's driving him laterally from hash to hash, if you really look at the full picture of the whole thing. And then probably the last one, because I don't want to leave the guys out front in, and then we'll get into some of the details of it, is you talk about pass rush lanes, right? Some of the biggest things with pass rush lanes, okay? So when we look at pass rush lanes, right? Okay, you have 5-man pressure here, and then you have an add-on from the back. Everybody's manned up against max protection, and you get them able to do it. Now, here's like this kind of goes into what I just talked about from the defense, right? Take a shot. So he adds on because the back engages, the lanes are full. And he has a productive miss. He throws him off the path, and now you end up with somebody. Now we get back to the core fundamentals, right through the strike zone, able to drive feet, able to clamp, and able to finish back on top. If we get 2 or 3 of those things, we're in good shape when it comes to that. Our goal is to get all those things, but if we get 2 or 3 of those things, and again, you see about the full extension, working pad under pad, and working through. Okay, so that's kind of like a background into like what we're looking for. There's a bunch of stuff in there, like looking and assessing film, right? But I don't want to forget these things, right? Football's non-negotiables: blocking, tackling, getting the ball, and keeping the ball. All right, that's what it is, and that's at the core of it. So I don't want to overcomplicate something that's a fundamental skill, and that's sometimes we're in danger of doing when we look at something really close like this. So here's one of the things we talk about. Whatever your system is, regardless of what it is, whatever you subscribe to, this is some of the things I always say you got to have. You got to be simple. It's got to be solution-based. So you can grade everything. That's awesome. You can grade from top to bottom, left to right, all that other stuff. But if you can't find a solution in what you're grading, it's just grading for the sake of grading, right? You're looking at skills, right? You have to have skills-based. Safety's always at a premium. We all know that at coaching this game, and especially some of the transitions that have happened. Simulate game situations, and then steal. But when I talk about steal, it's about smart steal, right? Steal concepts as opposed to stealing drills, right? Because you could have a drill that makes no sense in what you're actually doing, right? That's one of the things I always kind of like forewarn people at. Don't just do a drill for the sake of doing a drill. Make sure the drill has substance to what you're actually doing, right? And your system is always going to remain the same, right? This is pretty basic. Get to the ball, get in position, make contact, get the carrier down. But considerations for this, though. You consider the field, right, where it is on the field, as always going to be a consideration. Space is going to be, anytime you're going to talk about space, speed, and time, right? And space, speed, strength, and time, right? So some of the things we don't always consider are that. And we talk about the carrier, right? And I don't teach wide receivers, but I can only imagine. You're probably going to run a route a lot of times based on markings, right? And markings are dictated onto where people are. So we study a lot of the times what the defense does from the offensive perspective, but on the defensive side, we don't always study like the player does. Like we're trying to get to a mark and beat them to a mark, right? And that's kind of like you look at the Saquon Barkley tackle. That's a big thing. You know, with that ball carrier, you've got to cover speed. You've got to cover with speed. If you give him any kind of space, he's going to be in trouble. He was prepping to spin anyway, so you have to fight through that to be able to get there. And speed is at an emphasis because you have to know your carrier. And then again, they talk about the engagement, like, you know, which shoulder, am I free or am I engaged with a blocker, basically, when we look at it too. And for us, like everything that we do, because people talk about it, we do it in a 5-minute tackling plan. I'll show you a couple things we do for tackling warm-ups that we may do for like 15 seconds. Sometimes they're very, very simple. We'll always do like about a minute of tracking the carrier, and that'll probably be about the same drill every day when it happens, just because we want to be able to go ahead and build some consistency. And we'll talk about points of emphasis with that. And then we're going to do a lot of like just tackle work, and it's going to really be centered around 3 minutes and 45 seconds of tackle work. Is going to be around, is going to be, are we going to be stopping to teach and almost like install a drill like we install a player? Not as frequent, but sometimes we do have to like walk that line to show them where it is. Is it going to be based off of just reps, just movement, movement, movement? You're in this spot, you transition from this spot, we're building muscle memory. Is it going to be based off of like physical contact? Are we going to be stuck on that? Do we have some kind of a scenario, like a game-like scenario? Or do we have really choice when it comes down to it? Are the senses going to get in there? Are we going to create some kind of chaotic situation in there too? So we try to balance between these things. You don't live in just one place, but we make sure that the teaching is at the core of the entire thing. And one of the things we talk about reshaping the carrier, a big thing that we use is the idea of getting a hairline below the chin, right? This player, this was somewhere when I was head coach a couple of years ago. He, you know, this is a guy who's given up probably a good amount of weight to him, but he's got a lot of confidence in being able to go ahead and fit himself in that play. The great parts about it is this is like the definition of like hairline below the chin. Love and with, you know, with the ability to kind of pull a lot of pictures, we love to pull stills as much as we love to pull video for players in position to show them examples of it too. Just because if they can see an example, they can envision it. You know, as coaches, and we have a little bit of age and limitation physically to us sometimes, we can't always demonstrate the best thing, but if we can find pictures of things that are the greatest thing, it's something that can ultimately help us kind of carry it through and go where we want. And then obviously video, and the video portion is one of them too. And you'll see this is with us when we talk about reshaping. You'll see number 29 come in from across the screen on the right-hand side. That again, that comes back to that dip time and ability to drive through him and reset him laterally like we did in the other video as well. Just a short example of it as well. Okay. When we talk about tackling, we talk about some of the things, right? We talk about really qualifying what tackles are, right? Our goal is to be in that top left box. So we want to keep everything in line. We want to keep everything, when we talk about in line, we want to keep everything leveraged against something. We understand that at some point in time that there are going to be places that we can't get off blocks fully, that we have to do it while we're actually engaged. So we will teach a portion of that too. And I have a longer presentation I did on that. And if you want me to send that to you, I'll send you the link to that as well. It's another full presentation if you want to look through it. And I'll get into some of that with some of our drill work. So our goal is ultimately to keep everything in line. The reality is at some point in time, we're going to be in that bottom left box, which is the open field. So the biggest thing we talk about is that we would talk about take your shot, is we talk about the number one rule about an open field tackle is run it back to leverage. And leverage could be the sideline, or leverage could be another player, or leverage could be something in the defense that we push it back to. But we're always trying to run it back to leverage. We talk about own your leverage. And then the other thing too is as we burst, we want to make sure we stop their feet, right? So there's a ton of drills that you can do, and I'm not reinventing football by kind of telling anybody this stuff. But for players, these are points of emphasis. And then basically we're looking at the last chance, and we have a portion that we don't want to live in that bottom box, that bottom right box at all. We really don't want to ever go to that bottom right box, but there's a reality that sometimes you're going to get there, right? And then we talk about how we design the drills. We're looking at the portion of how do we meet these things? So each of these has to get a level of fundamental piece, like the teaching side again, situational, and then we talk about tearing off and recovery. So are you blocked? When I have to actually leave my feet, like when I actually have to get stalemated, like all of those things coincide with those things too. Like that's how we kind of work those is. And one of the things that we look at before anything else, and we get really, as coaches, we get, especially when it comes to this skill, we get really tied into the idea of common language. Actually stumbled upon this. We're more beneficial as coaches when we set it up in concepts than when we do in just saying, here's the language. And with that, this glossary that we have, we just took what everybody brought with them, right? And we kind of said, all right, your coaching point, and this goes again back to program alignment. It goes back to the coordinator. It goes back to the head coach and what they're going to say and what they believe. And that's got to fit into what your contact is going to be, right? I've worked for the last 3 head coaches. I've been offensive head coaches. But they know about football and they know about contact. They've all coached on the defensive side of football in some way, shape, or form, right? But they're going to stand up in front of somebody and they're going to say something that's going to coincide with tackling. It's going to coincide with contact. That's got to be reflected in what we're actually teaching. And the other thing too is it's going to set in, like we said before, it's going to set into the approach, the contact, or the finish part of it too. So these words are just words that we've adopted from people on our staff. But what we do is we root ourselves to some real serious anchors in concept, and no different. And I credit a lot of my thinking to Richie Gray, who's with he's done some work with USA. He does with World Rugby. He's like kind of all over the place. He's a contact specialist. I am not a rugby person by any stretch of the imagination, but I credit a lot to him because he's one who's kind of talked about the concept of like fighting to these concepts, right? Fighting to track the football, fighting to be in position or prepare for the football, fighting to connect to the ball carrier, and not really, and really having some kind of prescriptive area that gives you the ability to have limited error and really remains focused and not flimsy is what I want to say with that too. So when we look at this, the leverage part of it, for us, we look at what is leverage, and we talk about the key performance indicators in between. Like we talk about the concept of their ability to close space on the football, right? That's huge, right? Everything we do, we talk about right away, is about coaching from the feet to the eyes, right? Close space on the football, get the right angle, right? Come into balance, and ultimately avoiding the, let's put it this way, not allowing them to dictate change of direction, i.e. a two-way go. We want to go ahead and make them declare direction in the open field especially, but what we want to do is be able to dictate that. And then goes from the feet to the eyes, so we talk about where our eyes are on the ball carrier. This is something that I want to let you kind of think about. The further I am away from a ball carrier, the 2 furthest parts of my body actually have to speak to each other, right? So that's the most complex thing. So the furthest part of my body that has to speak to the furthest part of my body is my eyes have to speak to my feet, right? And I have to calculate distance in between that. So when people ask all the time, they ask, what's the toughest thing? Well, the toughest thing is almost like, the question that we constantly ask. We ask a ton of questions about open field. We ask a ton of questions about leverage. If we're asking questions about a lot of those things, we hardly ask questions about how to wrap up. That's pretty consistent. And that part of it, we're talking about the contact being from, from the base of your neck to your fingertips. That's really, we're talking about wrapping somebody up. That's the 2 closest parts of your body that have to talk to each other when it comes to tackling. So when we talk about, and this doesn't disqualify the drills that you're already doing for leverage, when we talk about something that's potentially more advanced, we want to have some distraction with the leverage. A lot of this, what we're doing is trying to establish entry points. So right here, we establish an entry point to the ball carrier. You see, they have to maintain focus while something is moving in an opposite direction, and then be able to go ahead and establish an entry point. Now, you may get out leverage, but then this is the concept of like fighting back into the play, right? It's about fighting back and finding a place where it goes, and when he declares, you declare, right? Off of that too, okay? And then we start getting, here's a little bit of an example of it on film. You're looking at the backer on the left hand, on our right hand side, number 26. Okay, as he does this, you see he's got to see through stuff, and he's got to work over the top, and he runs it right back into some leverage right there, right? Just the concept of that being able to happen at game speed. And then you talk about the ability to go ahead and press and work off of other people. In the tackle study and some other things we do, and especially in the teaching, depending on what you play, especially with a lot of the RPO game, somebody's going to get held at a level, right? somebody in your defense is probably going to get held at a level, and the other person's going to probably penetrate at a level. And that's no difference. This is just an example of when I was at Wagner, when we played a lot more quarters, and about those two guys working together, right? It wasn't exactly the same group. It was not always just backers working together. Sometimes it's inside backers and it's safeties in quarters coverage and a 3-down front, right? So it's about finding the group that's going to go ahead and push the ball to one another. And it's not always going to be the same thing. And again, adding obstruction and having to run to work to cut it back inside there too. So when we talk about, when we talk about the leverage piece, we go from leverage to burst. And the reason we use terms like leverage and burst is we're coaching to the action as opposed to coaching to the coaching point, right? The action that we want to have happen is bursting to the football. And when you looked at that graph before, and we talked about the posture, and then we talked about the same foot, same shoulder, we're talking about burst. To really define it is the action from posture. How quick can we get from posture to alignment? So how quick can we get from our body posture, our body position, into our near foot, same shoulder alignment? And that's that hinge that's in between those two things. Looking at that, when you look at like key performance indicators, as leverage was the two furthest parts of the body, right? Burst has the most areas of the body that are simultaneously have to work. Feet, hands, shoulders, hips, thighs, knees, everything, and eyes all have to work together, like consistently one after the other to get to a place where that's ultimately happening. So when we look at it, we talked a little bit about the difference where the foot placement was and about getting that foot in front of you. And sometimes that foot's not always in front of you. Sometimes you're leading with your, in the hoop, in a near foot, near shoulder. Sometimes it's going to be trailing behind you when your body position's at about 15 degrees like that, or any kind of low tackle like that. It's going to be behind you. So you have to kind of train to be able to press off and get that second and third foot in the ground. You activate the hands inside there. When we talk about the idea of dip time, we talk about the idea of staying big for as long as possible and being able to go ahead and show color, so that what ends up happening is the ball carrier, we make the ball carrier declare, and a lot of that has to do with our ability to stay square. Again, going from the feet to the eyes. Just a simple non-pad drill with that. And a lot of this stuff I'm going to show you is not as advanced. It's just stuff that we do to introduce concepts. So here's like an introduction to concepts where we have the focus on the tennis ball, and then getting right to it, being able to qualify leverage, but being able to stay square. We've activated the hands in here too, and we have different levels with the trash cans inside there too. So again, they have to see it, they have to work back to it, they have to be able to work towards the ball, and sometimes they have to definitely work vertically, but sometimes laterally as well, right? We work back in here. And then we talk about some of like one of our basic warm-up drills, right? We all probably re-coached over the course of time when we were coaching tackling. At some point in time, we talked about the idea of don't make an arm tackle. Well, one of the things that we teach, what we've taken from different places around the way, is our ability to restrict the arms. One easiest way to go ahead, and I know some people have some thoughts on like, if you want to go ahead and make better tacklers, have them take their helmet off. Well, there's some merit to that, and not that we don't necessarily do that, but not for obviously for full contact, obviously not. But there are some people that do that through the thigh board, and there's some things you could do non-pad. But like if we want to go ahead and make really good shoulder tacklers, let's restrict their arms. So when we do that, this is just a simple way to teach it and be able to go ahead and strike on the rise on the bag and be able to get the same foot, same shoulder down while staying square. And it's a quick warm-up drill, but you start to see little things that we have from there. So that's more about the approach body position. That's like the sizing up a little bit of a drill, right? That's not bang, bang, shoot 'em up contact. But then you look at when we really want to have serious contact and we want to enforce the idea of bursting through, right? And we want to have no area where you can hold up. We start to add drills like this, right? Drills where they've got to actually physically find entry points. Let me back that up and play it again. Where they have to actually find entry points through the bag. One of the reasons I love this drill is because it's easy to figure out if you're not running full speed. Because if you're not running full speed, you're not finding your way. You have to size up to move slightly to the left, slightly to the right, and accelerate out. And when you do, you look at that great position he actually ends up in because he's actually taught himself to go full speed. And then we're going to get to what that looks like to finish, but you'll see at the end, his feet will remain in the ground, and he does remain clamped on there. So here's a great example, right? This is a self-corrected example. Just wanted to go through. This is actually 2 consecutive plays from a couple years ago, from a play that we had over at Wagner when we first started the position, teaching a little bit more of this stuff. On the first one, disclaimer, he's going to miss this tackle. And what you see is the ball carrier is at the advantage because he's got his shoulder square, and he comes to balance like way too early on it. So you'll see it a little bit more from the end zone camera. Okay, here's what ends up happening. He kind of sees it again. This is why when we talk about CASKER and we talk about the call alignment, this is why all that stuff is so important, because he's got to be able to see something and he's got to be able to find something and ultimately get to there, and he falls off that tackle. This is the exact next play, and this is where the ability to self-correct is so key. Okay, we don't have him on the bench. We're not pulling him out of the game. You know, he got run through. He got in the path, and now you see the difference is now the ball carrier actually has to declare, and he actually finishes that play. He's giving up significant weight, but it gets into the open field. But it's the absolute next play, and you notice here the big thing here is he stays square for as long as possible, and as staying big and staying square, he forces the ball carrier to dictate, and he actually is able to get one of his feet off the ground, which is key. And then there's some little details like coaching inside there. You know, there's some details like we'll talk about some ways we teach off the scheme. You know, I'm a big, like, in a 3-down scheme, I'm a big, like, press and scrape guy. Big press and scrape guy playing over top of blocks. So we want to teach, this is, again, taking one concept and breaking it into 2 separate drills. We're talking about the lead drill, be able to slip a block that's just a PVC through a pop-up bag over there, and the ability to play pad under pad and work up in main contact. We're not big contact on there. The other part of it, too, is then we, on a separate day, these again, we'll go rep drills. On a separate day, we'll start from that position and then work out of it and burst out of it. So we really got to work through, and we're able to work through what our clamp looks like on a separate day. So now we get able to put those 2 drills together, and now we're teaching. It's hard to do it all at one time on the teaching side of it. So this is where you start to get to, there's not a lot of vision, decision, and action here, a lot of choice in here, but there's a lot of teaching that goes right into repetitions for us right here. And you start to see as you look to the details of it too. When we want to create some areas where we want to have some vision and decision action, it's change their field of vision. So when we look at a lot of our drills we have are probably that we put the bags on the same plane. When we put them on the same plane, players get to pre-calculate how far they have to run, right? They could say, I got to run about 6-7 steps. I'm going to take off and I'm going to tackle that bag. That's predetermined. But we all know, especially distance from the football, a game of football is not like that you're going to have to go ahead and react to a lot of things that happen off of there too. So one of the things we talk about is depth perception. If I put it all on the same plane, I can perceive how far I have to go. As opposed to depth sensation on the right-hand side, I have to feel where the thing, where the ball carrier is going to be. So here's an example how we'd look at something like that. Just a basic drill, right? You're using a trash can as our landmark. Okay, coach is giving direction. And we're working to get cleats in the ground. We're working to get grip. Coach is giving direction, basic, right? Landmark. Our landmark right now is the trash can. He's going to work through it. Good. We got different levels of bags. We've got a good scenario set up for a quarter safety to have to work downhill for them to go ahead and have to fit inside of a gap, right? If I fast forward, we start to look at what perception looks like. Here's depth perception. We change the planes of the bag. We've challenged them by changing the planes. So once we start to challenge them by changing the planes, coach is redirecting. This is a lot tougher. You start to notice they're not running as fast to the landmark because they're worried about that other piece. We're trying to infuse run as fast to landmark, and we'll react to you in the other direction off of that, right? So now you start to get to it, and I'll flip forward here. As he works off of there, now he's got, I got to redirect, and that's right on top of it. That's tougher. That's tougher, so I have to feel. And you see the little change in like how it is, and sometimes that has to go ahead and manifest itself into something different as a result of it. It's a little tougher. I got to get my feet underneath me because I'm right on top of it as opposed to being there. So that's different ways that we could vary up what we talked about before from contact and teaching to choice or vision and decision and action. And then ultimately now we get into the contact side. And we talk about the connection. We don't want to see any air between there. We talk about really coaching heavily what the clamp is going to look like. And like we said before, it's going to really be from the base of the neck. And we talk about squeezing with that arrowhead all the way down to the fingertips. And the reason I have react to the outcome at the fingertips is that sometimes you don't get a great hit on the ball carrier for whatever reason. And when you don't get a hit on the ball carrier, you're going to ultimately look to have to climb back into the ball carrier. but we look at things like arm cramp and the accuracy of the shoulder and make sure to hit with the top front of the shoulder and make sure that we are consistent with the shoulder tackling. But if we don't shoulder tackle, the play is not over. We can't just redo it. We have to fight our way into the play, right? So a simple way kind of teaching that about keeping players attached. And again, you start, these are maybe introductory or spring drills for us that we end up doing, the early summer drills, but there's stuff that we're looking at and make sure to get down to what we're looking for when we talk about staying attached to the ball carrier. We could do this by driving our feet, or we do this by rolling and just making sure we're staying attached. But you notice the big thing is every time they roll, they're gaining ground, right? So we're teaching them not just to roll, we're teaching them to roll and gain ground at the same time. And then we start to put it into context. And here's like a little bit more of a dynamic, right? When we started to get to there, we were playing a triple option team. This was a couple of years back at a different place, right? We're playing triple option team, so we're going to play off the cup block, which is a younger kid who's had trouble with the cup block to begin with, and we know it's going to end up probably being a lower tackle, as opposed to an older kid who's going to be able to get pressure, relieve pressure, get pressure, relieve pressure, explode out of it, and where his eyes go off for that, and he's going to make some more perimeter type stuff. We use the bands to go ahead and test the grip more than anything else too. And then we start to get into the phase that we talked a little bit about before, but I got a longer version of it too for like what it looks like when we're engaged with tacklers and we can't get off. Because if we're engaged and we're trying to work towards a ball carrier, if we take our hands off of that or relieve the pressure off of the pressure key, we may put ourselves in a position where we no longer have any kind of balance or any kind of base, and we can get driven out of that area, thus creating a seam for the carrier to work on the backside, and we can get gashed. And really, that's where, again, it works off of the fit. So if we're not being able to work off of the fit, we can have a problem there. And I have that saying, you got to be able to fit before you can hit, right, when it comes down to it. Okay, so, and then we talk about driving our feet. And now we talk about a lot of this being reaction. We talk about our cleats being able to stay in the grass. We talk about our leg drive. We talk about our hips, anchoring our hips on a roll tackle, right? We talk about rolling over our front foot. And again, we talk about the ability at the top for fight to regain leverage. You know, sometimes we lose our feet and we got to regain our feet too. And there's some things that you can look at from that as well. You know, I heard some really good assessors of tackling, a lot of them being players. They talk about contact balance. We talk about contact advantage. When we talk about contact advantage, we're talking about we want to have more feet in the ground than a ball carrier has feet in the ground, right? So if we could keep our cleats in the ground and get their feet out of the ground, well, we consider ourselves in an advantage position. So we kind of try to calculate that, and we talk about getting two in the ground to players all the time. Now, finishing high and wide, finishing on bags is great, but a lot of times we do tackle below the waist. So one of the drills that we use for that, just to kind of introduce the keeping the cleats in the ground with the 15 degrees and the elongated spine, the full extension of the body, is our ability to try to press these bags just across the ground. We have some choice in here too. We want to emphasize speed, and we want to emphasize cleats in the ground, which he misses right there. If you ever tried to slide one of these bags in the ground, you can't put your hands on the top of it. You've got to get to the extension of it, which means you've got to almost react and put your hands out in front of you, which is not the easiest thing to do, and actually slide it. And it takes some time to kind of get done. But again, this is emphasizing the cleats in the ground, which you see in the other drills, we're emphasizing throughout everything that we do. And then another thing that I like to get to do is I use pool noodles for this drill. And one of the reasons I use pool noodles for the drill is more than anything else is because they're lighter. And when the force is working away from you, the force is going to end up being lighter. So when we look at it, we want to stop them and be able to explode out of there. Plus, we can get to the area where the hips are on the body. And then as we manifest the drill and get it more, we can start to infuse some choice in there too. And one of the things we do with this, once we get to the level where we start to put choice and obstructions and added drops and start to move them out of there, one of the big things we want to do is we'll start calling out color instead of just pointing. Because now we're starting to infuse communication in another sense instead of just vision. So they've got to listen and they've got to recall where that is in the field. You know, where was the orange one? Where was the blue one? And where do I have to go from there? But they have an aiming point and they could work off there. Just a quick example of it. When you start to look, I like this clip. I like this clip for some reasons. I don't like it for others. The obvious reason is that we're chasing him towards the goal line, which is not our ideal situation. But when he actually makes the play and he rolls over, you start to see he understands how close to get in the strike zone, to get his hands on the hips, and to actually be able to react and roll him over and stop his feet and live us to play another down, which is key. And that's what the noodles kind of teach, because the force is working away. And again, you know, that's the force working away, the force working in the box, changing it up. We have a standard about rolling over twice and ending on top of all of our drill work. okay? Because we want to look to do is if we can't get our cleats in the ground, we've got to get both hips in the ground and finish back on top. So when we look at the finish I talked about before, these are a couple of the standards that we look at. But one of the things we're talking about on the finish, when we go back to the beginning, is we're looking at always trying to go ahead and make sure that we reshape, that we dent, that we're looking at finish on top and face the opposing goal line, right? So when we're doing that, we're going to reduce yardage. So like I talked about scraping and pressing, now I'm talking about tearing for linebackers. Like when we're doing that, again, that's where why like the keys and the reads and everything is so key, because now we're just using the sandbags and we're anticipating that this is going to be weight that's going to be working towards us, and we're going to tear it off. And now we're testing it. As you work around, he's going to try to get that thing back towards the goal line and get himself back on top of the play as we're trying to pull it away from him. Here's just a couple of examples of it. You're going to finish off, and you look and see it in play, get him back and yoke him back towards the goal line. Right there, if he's able to do that, he's out of phase. He's got to work himself back in. He's not in the best position. But as soon as he gets his hands, that's the training to get the hands back on and get him back in that direction. Okay, here's another example of it too, with play you just saw working of it. Again, there's a scrape off of there we just saw in the other drill, and then be able to work back towards the goal line and finish back on top. Okay, and then the last one that we have with that is just a D lineman. And again, it's not ideal, but he's still working to reduce yardage by getting back on top. And these are things we try to pinpoint for our guys in film, and that's because that's part of our mantra. That's what we're teaching. So in doing that, that helps them tremendously to understand and visualize what we're actually asking to do. So we talk about knockback tackling. This is our knockback period. And in our knockback period, this is how we would like lay out the field. These are all the drills we just did. This is how every coach would get. This would be posted in the locker room. This was a spring practice from last year. And this would just be, that's why I pulled those drills, because these are all the drills that you just saw in there in some way, shape, or form. But again, you start to see like even on the bottom right where it says PVC dip and rise, like that's the warm up for that one, right? As opposed to them all having a tracking, like EDD tracking, you know, it's really how the coach wants to teach that. And then like you see like swoop drive warm up was what you just saw. And then we worked with some band stuff off of there too for the corners. So coach, I'm definitely, I went through at a pace just to keep you on track, but if anybody's still out there, that's the hardest thing about it, is anybody still there, but I'm open to really any questions. If you got them, coach, that's my contact information. If you want to email me to ask for this stuff, that's more than fine. Twitter's probably better. I'm probably going to get it to you faster because I check that more like frequently throughout the day, and I have access to it. But I'm more than willing to give you. I got some links, that stuff that I put up on YouTube that's unlisted because it's just easier to send video that way of clinic stuff and some other stuff to do, and then you know, a version of PowerPoint that I can send you to. And if there's anything that you have questions about, you feel free. See the thing lit up with the chat.
Fantastic, coach. I appreciate it. Really good stuff. I mean, you could tell you spent a lot of time, you know, working on this and you know, working all the drills and getting all the, you know, a lot of the studies in, and that's big time stuff. I appreciate it. Hey, guys, any questions out there? Anybody? Anybody? Any questions?
Nobody's listening. I did a really good job, but either way.
Yeah, no, it was great.
Got out there.
I know I made a ton of notes, and you know how it is. You know, you think about something, then you know, sure, you kind of question later. So
yeah, so, one coach has a question. Do you have any different language or drills for the D line? Not
yeah,
really. We'll just work on different things. Like we'll spend more time on the engage stuff, and we'll work off some hoop stuff on there. But we're gonna when it comes to the tackling. They're going to fit more in the engaged category than they probably are going to fit in the open field category. So we're going to spend our majority in that quadrant up there for the D line. And I'll send you, like I said, if anybody wants, I'll send you with the engaged stuff. It's like a language unto itself. So this was kind of like an overview of like everything that's kind of there. But I'm more than willing to share like either the drill details that are inside there, but give you like a little bit of like, you know, how we're able to build a drill, but really sometimes how we start off with teaching a concept, because keeping the cleats in the ground and the grip and some things are sometimes foreign. We don't live in that world. So just everybody kind of knows that too. You know, it's week by week. What's your emphasis on head placement on tackling phase? Head out of the tackle is obviously the biggest emphasis, like not hitting it. And the other part of it too is, I know a lot of people get into this whole head behind, head in front. we're going to get into the place where it's going to be, not to overcoach that, we're going to say the nearest foot and the nearest shoulder, right? So the nearest foot and the nearest shoulder is going to, the head is going to slide to the side of wherever that is. So we can't always predictate leverage, but the number one is obviously the head out of contact. That's number one thing. And there's probably some other details. There you go. Like, if you had to choose 4 top tackling drills for high school with 10 minutes, I'm looking for a circuit. I would have something that's, if I was saying straight circuit, I would have this, Coach Harvey. I would have something that is definitely leverage based. I would have something that's vertical contact based. So it's from the waist up. That's lower body contact based, right? From the waist down. And I would have something that has some working off of another person, so that there's a 2-man drill. So if I had 4 stations I had to do in 10 minutes, I would live in those worlds, like over there. The good thing about the other one too is you can limit the contact, and you could ramp up the contact in one of those stations. That in this way, like if you decide like in the above the waist when you want to make it a challenging drill, you can ramp that up and you can take hits off this. Then that all 4 stations are not contact stations. This way you can take the hits off the players too. But I would look at those 4 things if I was doing it just point blank to ask that. So that would be where I would go. So there's a couple in there too. I fired those off quick, Coach.
No, that's good.
Gotcha.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right, Coach. Again, thank you very much. I know all of us got a lot of good stuff out of it, and appreciate you coming on. I know we're all busy. You probably want to go grab yourself some dinner. So
No. I'm trying to figure out what this day was, but I want to thank you for having me on and obviously representing Fordham. We're out on the East Coast, so if there's any questions about that, please feel free to let me know and get in contact with me. I can put you in touch with whoever we need to for that. And I want to thank you for doing this, keeping coaches sane and keeping coaches safe at the same time. And hopefully everybody here and all your families are safe and continue to remain safe as we move towards the next phase of this thing.
Well, we appreciate it. I can speak for everyone. We appreciate it, Coach. You do the same. You stay safe, and we'll connect soon. I hope we'll all get back out in the field and get back to the new normal. All right. Okay. So thanks a lot, Coach. I appreciate you coming on, and have a good night, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.